That there are three steps to data informatics, and the first step is being strategic about collection of data.
Well, hey, Alex, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you, Rafi. Thanks for having me over.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I'm excited about diving into the world of like data in healthcare and how clinicians can leverage it. But before we get too into the weeds, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to what you're doing now?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I am a well-known dinosaur physical therapist, the type that are dying out and slowly going extinct. In the words of one of my colleagues, that I'm seeing patients one day a week just to stay relevant, and she said, "I've never
Yeah.
seen a therapist as old as you." So here we are, right? I am in a third decade of actively being involved in musculoskeletal care, and still, ironically, passionate and loving every second of it. I think
Nice.
we are in a wonderful world of taking care of people, taking care of patients, and I think allied health sciences, PTOT speech, we do a wonderful job that is undervalued by the healthcare community. So my mission for the last 10 years has been how do we optimize the understanding and appreciation of what we do, but also how do we digitize and digitalize the care provision so that we can really focus on patient care responsibilities, but add an extra portfolio, extra nuance of technology and informatics into the clinical care so that we can all do a better job and bring our industry into the next generation, next century. So here we are.
Yeah, yeah, and I was, looking through your LinkedIn profile. It looks like we've shared a couple clients. It looks like you're doing a lot of consulting, right? Strategic advising around healthcare. I guess products coming to the market and all that. And a big piece of that, we had talked a while back, has been about the data. So I guess talk a little bit about data in healthcare currently, like its current state, like how it's currently being gathered or used. I'm sure it's not being used as effectively as it could be. And like, what can organizations think about, or how can they think about using the data that we're getting better?
Yeah, so I think that first let's label data for what it is. The data
Sure.
is information, and so I think assigning proper labels towards what we operationalize as data is step one. So we need an
Okay.
organization or an industry needs to be very specific about the label of data. That there are three steps to data informatics, and the first step is being strategic about collection of data. So as a clinical community, we need to really become better data collectors. We do a decent job having variable sources of data lakes or the data streams coming into our entity, but then what we do with it is not always great. So our collection, like the collection of the data repositories, need to be done well. The second step is the analysis. And analysis of data has to be actionable. So we need to analyze data based on the best practices, but also we need that analytics to serve a purpose. It's not enough to analyze data unless it has a purpose or there's an end user. The third step is operationalizing it. Like once we've collected and once we've analyzed data, how do we make it actionable? How do we create an operational insight from this data? What do we do with it? And so right now, as a professional community, we are probably hemorrhaging 97% of available data into ether. So we think of data as gold, and we're just letting it fall away from us, right? So that 3% of data that we do use, we usually use for compliance, and we use it for standardization, but not really for any specific insight into the care provision, into the care qualification. Again, there's three steps. There's the data collection, data analysis, and data operationalization. And to me, data is anything, right? But really, it's anything that we choose to label as something that's meaningful to our operational use and operational need. So
Yeah, and I guess when it comes to like clinicians or clinical organizations actually using data, I guess the first step you mentioned is like being strategic about how you collect that data, but part of that also includes like deciding what you want to collect, right? And like, so how does an organization begin thinking about, okay, we're going to get real about our data, we're going to start tracking it, analyzing it and using it to make decisions, um, where do I begin in selecting what data is important and what's noise, and how do I pick what I'm gonna track?
I mean, I'm going to go to the lowest common denominator, which
Sure.
is the patient-reported outcome measures. I think the patient-reported outcome measure is a lowest threshold of data collection that every operator, every clinician should both understand how to use, how to interpret, and how to operationalize. A patient-reported outcome measure, it creates a comprehensive 360-degree view of a clinical encounter. And so when we are collecting objective measures, that's obviously great, but a patient-reported outcome measure gives us the insight of that individual's state of being. These are also sensitive tools, and they're sensitive to change. So we not only need to do a good job collecting outcome measures, but we also need to do a better job analyzing outcome measures, understanding what are the thresholds, how these outcome measures are sensitive to change to a specific cohort, specific diagnosis. And then ultimately, the last step, right, the operational step, is how does this outcome measure impact our deliverables? So when we have outcome measure that we have somebody fill out before they start their clinical journey, does it really serve a purpose beyond compliance measure, or is it something that we reference back at each stop point within a traditional encounter to help us create a conversation point with a consumer where they are, whether their trajectory is heading in the right direction, whether they are not doing a good job like, coming to that, like whether there's a fork in the road, right? So outcome measures is really the best available resource. If I can sprinkle a little bit of a caveat of other points of data, which is objective measures. I think a rehab community does
Yeah.
a less than perfect job utilizing technology within the clinical space. We have now a proliferation of different tech operators that have a propensity of these clinical tools that can help us objectify some of these findings, and yet we still continue to rely on analog or manual ways of collecting this objective data, which is neither reliable, nor viable, nor clinically relevant. But we continue to do it because it's either cheap or because we don't have enough bandwidth to actually explore some of these objective tools and objective measure collection units that can help us operate. So PROM data is one, and then objective findings is the other. That's really important.
Yeah, and you touched on tools and things like that. I imagine some of those, um, like let's take, I don't know, goniometry or something like that, where there's a lot of inter-rater, variability in between, clinician A and clinician B or clinician C or whatever. Like I'm assuming some of these tools that you would implement as well, they have the added benefit of being more accurate over time, depending on, regardless of what clinician is involved. And then you're talking not only using that, using whatever tool it is to make sure you're getting accurate measurements, but then finding a way to take the data that those, or the measurements, the actual assessments that those tools give us, and then track it over time, monitor over time, analyze it, splice it, look at it from, clinic A to clinic B to, national benchmarks and the like. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess on a larger scale, creating standards of how we operationalize this data, right? So standards of if you're going to go for goniometry, then once your goniometric measurements are taken, what is the end purpose of this? How sensitive is this data? And what do we plan to do with it? Like whether it's any serves any foundation into a patient communication, right, into the patient journey. So yeah, there's a way to create a more granular data collection. Obviously, goniometry can be digitized with a much higher precision, and again, we're not talking about something that you have to go out and buy a really expensive tool. We all
Yeah.
have our phones in our pockets, and a phone goniometer is exponentially more accurate than a plastic goniometer that we find in a clinical space. And yet we still continue to do things the way they are. So yeah, it's a way of creating standards of care and then objectifying these standards of care into a clinical practice. So
Yeah. All right. And a while back when we had first talked, you had mentioned this idea of healthcare being, or healthcare data being both an input and an output in the process of care. Can you explain that idea just a little bit, and we'll kind of dig into it?
Yeah, for sure. Data flows, right? That data is omnipresent. Data flows. So the data input is the information we take in regarding that specific encounter. The data output is the information that comes out from that encounter in regards to the clinical efficacy and the clinical deliverables. The complete flow of information inside that helps govern the delivery of care, and the output of data that helps govern a trajectories and a forecasting of the future needs or the future recoverables. So then you create that continuous feedback loop of data coming in, data coming out, and creating an operational insight from this feedback loop into that we can provide back to the end user, whoever the end user is, right? So whether it's a
Yeah.
patient or whether it's a physician or whether it's a payer who is looking to collect this data to see whether the service you provide is holds value, right? And that goes into a larger picture of like this input and output of data serving as a value benchmark into the clinical care delivery process. Or
Yeah.
what is value, right? Like how do we substantiate value? Right now, value is just it has to do with an arbitrary encounter. If you create this feedback loop of data flow, both the input and output, that becomes a much more granular value proposition to the end user.
Yeah. Well, I think you touched on something super important there too, which is different people or stakeholders, if you will, in the healthcare space. They want to see different things from the data, right? Like if you're communicating to a physician, they're wanting probably, range of motion benchmarks for their total knee replacement or something like that. But if you're looking at maybe a payer, they're wanting to see, are you treating our patients effectively, getting them the outcomes that we desire, that's clinically appropriate, and saving us money, right? So
Mhm.
there's all of these different ways that the same data can be interpreted, visualized, communicated, all of that kind of piece. And I guess this is probably something that gets overlooked, maybe for your boots on the ground clinician that doesn't really understand, like, why are we gathering all this data and all of this. But like when we talk about the move to value-based care, which has been on the horizon since, I don't know, you and I were probably both in school years ago. I remember them talking about this in 2010 when I was in grad school. Like, value-based care is coming.
Mhm.
But a big component of that is the ability to gather, to analyze, interpret data, and then make decisions based off of that data, right?
Yeah. I think it again. This comes into the operational part where the value-based care. If you look at the proposition, first labeling value. Value is
Yeah.
cost over outcome, right? So the cost of care divided over the outcome of care. So both for data points, the cost is a viable option based on the economic benchmarks of the care delivery process. The outcome has to do with the outcome measures or any other way you choose to objectify outcome. So value-based care, like the value part is cost over outcome. The base is how we choose to integrate that into our delivery process, and the care has to do with the discipline that you're practicing in. Uh, Value-based care is more than just loss protection or loss attrition. Value-based care is about standardization, and
Yeah.
so now you don't have any capacity to standardize clinical delivery process because you just don't have this I guess the single source of truth. There is no standardization when you have 10 clinicians practicing 15 philosophies, providing 20 different outputs based on the
Yeah.
time of the day or based on the philosophy or last class you took, last how you woke up in the morning. So part of it is having a foundation of that single source of truth that would be the groundwork for the value-based care. And then the rest of it, it depends on what the objectives are, right? Like if your objective is not to lose, you have a very different game plan than your objective is to win. If you're playing soccer, right? Like if your objective is to tie the game, you're going to play more defensively than if your objective is to win.
Yeah.
And that's like when you are providing health services. If your objective is to improve somebody's well-being, then what is your degree of certainty that what you are doing is actually actively acting? That's probably redundant, but an agent of change versus your care delivery process is inert, and the time
Yeah.
is the active agent. So I think that's every clinician, every boot on the ground should be questioning: Am I being the agent of change, or am I an inert object? And the agent of change is contextual or time driven. So
Or time. Yeah. I was about to say that's one of the big ones is like, did the patient get better because you did something, or did the patient get better because it's been 8 weeks, now the tissues have healed, or whatever
yeah.
whatever it happens to be. I know that's a common a common discussion that goes around the circles in the evidence-based practice realm for sure.
Yeah. I think that's if you when I read a residency program through like way back when I was a pre-dinosaur era, we I think the residents knew that there's the 25, 50, 25% breakdown. There's 25% of patients that will get better because of what you're doing directly. Like you have the skill
Yeah.
set to make these people better. No one else does, right? Your professional skill set will make these individuals better. There's 50% of people that I think are hybrid. They will get better because of you. They'll get better because of time. They'll get better because of all the other nuances that impact their clinical recovery. And then there's 25% of people that you need to be discriminate on because these may not potentially be the people that you need to take care of. These are the people that may need another discipline, another time, or you may need to not deliver care. That's where you provide low value care because these are the people that will get better on their own. So why are you keeping them in your delivery? So I think that 25, 50, 25 breakdown is an important factor to evaluate when you're taking care of patients. And I think each individual client patient will migrate from the 25% to 50% based on their time and when you capture them, right? So this capture of a clinical diagnosis is a pretty important factor where if you capture someone in the acute phase, we know that early intervention leads to better outcomes. You are capturing them in the 25% that I'm going to give you proper information, insight, create a plan of care that will help you guide you through their recovery. If you capture them later in life, right, or later in their diagnostic life, then these are the people that are already like fluctuating. They may be getting better on their own, or they may be comfortable with their state of being. And then the late capture, these are the people that like if you're seeing someone on an ongoing basis for extended period of time, and all you're doing is providing reassurance and potentially these passive modalities, passive care, right? These passive analgesic modalities, then are you really doing anything of value, or is there potential iatrogenesis to your care? Like the iatrogenic effect is that by the fact that there's a psychosocial role play, somebody is in your clinic playing the role of a
Yeah.
patient, and you're playing the role of a doctor or of a therapist. You are creating a negative health response because this individual will probably be much better served being in the gym or being in their community than being in your clinic. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess leveraging data to make those decisions, especially when it comes to like value-based care, or at least thinking about it, and its forthcomingness into the space. A lot of the discussion is around the standardization, about making sure that we're following maybe best practices, meeting standard benchmarks for care and all of that. I mean, that does require some intentional tracking, analyzing, and kind of making decisions based off of that data. Is any of that, as you see it, is any of it out of the reach of, say, like small independent private practices? Is this one of those things that like only big hospitals and big health systems should really be focused on because they have the volume of patients to really make get statistically whatever powerful data, or is this something that like every clinician should be thinking about, regardless of whether they're a solo practitioner maybe treating 50 patients a month versus a big hospital system that their clinic does 1,000 visits a month or something like that?
I mean, it's a wonderful question, Rafi. I think I would say that the smaller the practice, the smaller the clinic, the more the responsibility is to collect clinical data and to operationalize it. I think hospitals already do a good job understanding the path trajectories because of
Yeah.
the health economics, and so they're not going to rely on your input of data. But for individual solo practitioners or small clinics, they need to have a standard approach of how this data is being collected. And again, I'll rely on patient-reported outcomes as the most approachable way of creating these conversation points through the recovery journey. You have to have a standard way of assessing somebody's clinical process and clinical progress that is more than based on their subjective state of being or your subjective analysis. There has to be an objective way of determining somebody's recovery path based on where they are, and that's where you rely on objective measures. You Without objective measures, there are other ways of creating these objective stopgaps, which is instituting things like a global rating of change, right, or perceived uh, scales, perception scales, where individual gets to grade their own progress.
Yeah.
These two create a little bit more granularity and objectivity to the recovery cycle because, again, that it has to do with at least some of non-arbitrary numeric value pertaining to somebody's recovery process. So yeah, Rafi, I think the smaller the organization, the smaller the clinics, the higher the responsibility it is for them to objectify the delivery cycle and not to fall into the trap of only focusing on the business cycle.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned so objective outcome measures are the way probably the lowest hanging fruit for this for especially like an independent private practice or something like that. Are there tools or resources that you would like recommend somebody go look at, or maybe even purchase, or you know, I don't know if it's there's SaaS models and stuff like that, platforms that you can purchase that will visualize that data for you or analyze it for you. Like where does a clinic start when they're like, okay, we're going to get serious about our data, we're going to start tracking outcome measures because that's the easiest way, lowest hanging fruit. Where do I begin? Is that something they can look at their EMR with, or are you relying on third party vendors? How does that whole piece working for clinicians?
So I'll play the political fifth and say that it's up to the individual consumer.
Yeah,
So I think on the lowest level, the lowest threshold, and this is the appeal to the younger clinicians that have a little bit more of a technological savvy. It can take you probably no more than an hour to create a Google sheet with a proper formula
yeah,
to structure any outcome measure that you are already doing to determine the MDICs and other principal factors that help you grade these individuals. Then the next step is to protect patient privacy, create an UUID number for each patient that you can then track over time, and then create these standardized tools right there in your Google Suite. I think it's a simple formula to implement, a simple formula to design, and you need absolutely nothing. You need
yeah.
the ability to understand how these tools are graded, and then you need the formula that responds to the scores that you're inputting to really understand the trajectory. That's all. That's your hours of homework. Uh,
Yeah.
if you want to go higher, there are absolutely suites and there are organizations that provide a much more granular analysis based on larger cohorts that create these larger benchmarks. And it's fine to utilize them. I mean, it's fine to use resources to create a much more objective measure. But I think if you want to start participating in this, all you have to do is you have to put maybe a little bit more of energy into creating your own instrument, and
Yeah.
then you have it. And then the key becomes more of a discipline that you have to be disciplined about integrating these tools
Inputting
into
the
their
data.
practice, right?
Yeah.
So that's the key.
Yeah, that's I'm thinking. So we get clinic students that come through the clinic every now and then on rotations, and I just thought, you know, one of them is going to be doing that for their next clinical assignment.
Oh yeah, I mean, like
Pick a data point, pick an outcome measure. You're going to
yeah.
track it over time. Yeah, that's awesome.
It literally is like like with the emergence, especially of these large language models and the emergence of your
Yeah,
chat GPTs of the world. Like the times of you expending energy for higher level compute is gone. We don't like you can expend energy being creative, right? Like I think that's the liberation of these language models is that we can focus on being creative instead of focusing on spending hours deriving to these algorithms and formulas. But there's a much better way of using these free resources to create a more objective, granular practice that can be done by absolutely anyone, but definitely someone who has been out of school for less than 10 years can use these tools with exponentially greater power than, again, like dinosaurs like me. So,
well, Alex, thanks so much for coming by talking about healthcare data and how we can think about using it. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or something we need to touch on that we've missed?
I think, Rafi, it's like one call to action, which is a call to action
Yeah,
to musculoskeletal professionals in the United States. So the PTs, OTs, and speech, we understand and appreciate your value. Understand that what you're doing fits perfectly into the healthcare system, and it has exponentially a lot higher power and higher importance than we are being given credit for. So almost create a larger level of self inquiry and understand that you are important, but learn to advocate for yourself, learn to advocate for your practice, and learn to assert your state in a healthcare model that goes beyond being a physician extender. Learn to be an answer to a larger level need, because you will need to, all of us, the allied health professionals, will have to serve a much bigger role in an emerging healthcare model in the next 10 to 15 years. So be prepared. Don't be caught
Yeah.
off guard. So the call to action is like look in a mirror and see that you are actually important, and you need to do things that advocate for yourself, because nobody else will do it for you.
Yeah. Awesome. Alex, thanks so much. Where can people connect with you, learn more about your work, see, maybe just send you an email or whatever? Like, how do people connect, check out your work, learn more? Maybe you've got some resources about data and utilizing data. Where do you want to send people?
So, LinkedIn has been a pretty phenomenal resource, and I'm
Okay.
prolific about dumping garbage on LinkedIn on a daily basis. LinkedIn is great. My email is sashadpt, SASHADPT at gmail.com. I have a consulting agency, a rehab think tank, always happy to help people on a larger level. But beyond, I think, well, like, meet me at one of the conferences if you're attending. I'm like that
Oh,
short,
yeah.
bold guy who is grumpy all the time. But
Awesome.
looking forward to it. And Rafi, thanks for your time, man. Like that's like what you're doing is important. So I appreciate this and I appreciate your message.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Have a good one, man.
You too, dude.